So good afternoon, everyone. Is this working? Can you hear me? No? No? All right. I think it's all right. So I think this is my first gig as a moderator. So I hope you'll bear with me, and you guys can tell me if I'm doing it wrong. So I wanted to just tack on a little bit, if I may, to the introductions that were made. One thing that really struck me when looking at, I'm not even sure, it's like, do we call you Attorney Ortiz? Just our own Massachusetts badass, can I say that?
Yeah.
In your tenure as U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, that you had started the Civil Rights Enforcement Division. Did I get that right?
Yes, that's right. I established the first district-wide civil rights unit. Eventually, it initially started as a civil rights enforcement team because we weren't sure how much work we were going to develop, but by the time I left the office 2 years prior, I had established a civil rights unit.
Wonderful. And then for you, Secretary of State, one of the things that jumped out at me from your, just even 2 years into your tenure, and people don't know this, the last time that I saw Nellie, she was running for office. So this is a nice reunion for us that she's halfway into her first term, that already that you have pushed legislation to increase transparency in government in Rhode Island. So I just wanted to call out those two things, because ultimately this work is about not just being las primeras, but doing the work that is going to advance our communities, right? And I wanted to just, give you guys props for really using the offices for doing things that are going to serve and continue to serve our communities. You can give a hand clap for that.
Thank you.
So the first question that I wanted to throw out there was about defining moments in your career. And I think the more traditional format of the question is, can you tell us about a defining moment that led you to the decision to pursue the office for which you're here? But also I want to give you the option, I'm going to take a little moderator's privilege, if there's a moment that stands out for you in your path of a time when you really questioned, oh my gosh, did I do the wrong thing? What did I get myself into? Can I really do this? Because I think it's so meaningful and important for folks who are considering pathways in public service to know that we all have those moments, right? And how do you work through them?
Sure. I had been in the U.S. Attorney's Office for about 12 years. I'd been a lawyer for close to 30 years when I made the decision that I was going to apply to be U.S. Attorney. And even then I was second guessing, and that's, I think, what happens with a lot of us. I heard this morning about the imposter, kind of phenomenon, or, where you doubt yourself. And I think in particular, women second guess themselves and doubt themselves, thinking that when you see an opportunity come about, you really want, maybe I'm not, prepared enough, I'm not experienced enough, I'm not ready for this job. And then you will see someone else who gets it, and you want to kick yourself because they have probably less than half of the experience that you have. And so for me, I did second guess myself. And also for a very prominent position like U.S. Attorney, where it's presidentially appointed, when the process started, of course, there were other names that were in the media that were certain to become U.S. Attorney. And so defining moment for me was, and what led to it was that I had been in the office 12 years, a lawyer for almost 30, and it was time for a change. It was time for me to do something different. And when this opportunity arose, I just kept going back, should I or shouldn't I? And as I talked to a number of colleagues, and in particular one that was on the advisory committee that was reviewing candidates for Senator Kennedy at the time, who would then be making his recommendation to the president, this person said to me, Carmen, why wouldn't you apply? That you have an incredible professional career in terms of having been a state prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, a criminal defense attorney, civil litigator, as well as done criminal justice program with involving judges from Guatemala at Harvard Law School for 3 years. And so I had varied experiences. And I knew if I was doubting myself and I wasn't ready at this time, I was never going to be ready. And he said something to me that has always stayed with me is, don't be afraid to take this risk. And I had never been someone to take a risk, but this job seemed so big at the time. And I didn't have the political connections. I had not donated $1 gazillion to a lot of the politicians. And I thought that would hurt me, but instead it inured to my benefit. And I think that for me, it was that I felt I was meant to do something more, and that this was a great opportunity to really serve, to make a difference, to hopefully be a role model. And when I did what I tell everyone now to do is, don't second guess yourself to death. Don't be afraid to take risks. At the end of the day, you have nothing to lose. Because even if I had not gotten this position, you learn a lot going through different processes to obtain a promotion or a different position outside of your, out of your comfort box. And then again, if you don't try, you don't get it. And I was very fortunate, and I did.
Absolutely.
So for me, there wasn't one moment, and I think this is this is well spoken of in literature around gender issues and looking at what women decide to do and when they decide to do it. I was very much the prototypical woman elected in that it took me a long time and a lot of little aha moments along a path. And so I remember, for example, listening to a panel of elected women, the lieutenant governor, the then treasurer, who's now governor, and the Senate president speak at a panel on trying to get women to run. And the lieutenant governor at that time said, Rhode Island's a small state. If you're concerned around family balance issues or whatever your situation is, it's not like you can't go home every night. You're not in that kind of a territory. And I remember going like, oh yeah, that's right. And she said there should be more women in elected office given the size of our state. She has a point. I had been involved in public policy since the very beginnings. Like I was the kid in 7th grade who raised her hand and said, sure, I'll run for student council, because why not? Looking back, you could see that I would be involved all the way through. But I never thought I would run for like this kind of an elected office. I really felt that I was going to be, in fact, my undergraduate degree is in public policy. I have a master's in public administration, and I was going to be that number 2 person that gets the stuff done. Because the politics thing is kind of ugly and nasty, and there's all this stuff that happens in the fundraising. And so instead I got involved in, civic engagement activities, trying to get other people to run, joining, a women's organization that looked at public policy issues through a gender lens called the Women's Fund of Rhode Island. I learned how to fundraise there. And so that was another aha moment, something that I can also do. I helped create the Rhode Island Latino Political Action Committee around 15 years ago, and I actually became its president. I got appointed as a deputy secretary of state. And similarly, thinking, like you just sort of accumulate all these experiences until finally, and in Rhode Island, and probably in Massachusetts as well, you get to meet people. And some people in public office are amazing. And then others are just regular people. And so finally, enough people had asked me over the years, so when are you gonna run? And it got to be a little bit weird. Like it got to be like I'd be at a conference somewhere and having, a drink after the conference with somebody, and they'd be like, so when are you gonna run? And I'm like, what do you mean, me? No, never. Like I'm not that kind of person at all. But I kept getting that question asked. And so finally I got to a point where I said, it's an open position, Secretary of State. I had been Deputy Secretary of State. I had run the office for 4 years. I could go in there right now and do it. I just have to get elected. So, had that conversation. I have a husband and 3 small children, and had that conversation of, can I do this, and went forward. Once I made the commitment, I definitely didn't look back, although parts of it kind of did. The fundraising did give you a little bit of PTSD every now and then. And I am glad that in high school I ran cross country, because at times the election seemed like one long slog towards a finish line. But I got elected, and it's such a blessing. I was the underdog candidate in Rhode Island. I was not supposed to win because I was up in the Democratic primary against a very wealthy, old Newport, Rhode Island family guy who had run before and had basically gotten the endorsement of the Democratic Party and of all the labor unions. And here I was, thinking that I could raise enough money to talk to Rhode Islanders and say, I actually have the credentials to do this job, and these are the reasons why you should elect me, and that I would be elected. And when I won the primary, the most common thing I got told was, wow, Nellie, congratulations. I voted for you. I didn't think you were going to win. Okay, funny, right? Yeah, really funny.
No,
really
it's
funny.
fine.
The first 5 times, when you go through 2 months of people telling you that, you go, whoa, there were a lot of people who thankfully voted and voted for me, but didn't think I was going to win. And so it speaks to, actually, it's a blessing in disguise, because I can look at you in straight in the eye and say, your vote matters. That the act of voting is such a solitary thing, right? It's you and your ballot. And who cares? Un voto más, un voto menos, whatever. But it does matter, because it's that collective force of vote, of all those individuals voting that can change things in the history of a state.
That's great. That is a great case study. Let it be a lesson to everyone. As you're thinking about which commitments you want to make up there, I noticed that registering yourself, your friends hadn't gotten some votes yet.
I know.
So
What's up
you
with
could
that?
flip
So
it.
they're all
Maybe
registered.
It's because you're all registered.
They're all
right?
registered, and they're
I would
friends.
You've already taken all your
I
friends to
think
get
we're-
registered, so your next could be, drag someone to the polls with you next time, so that we can have more stories like Nellie's. There we go. So I want to just draw out something I heard you say in a different format. I heard you say, Carmen, that that idea of I'm not that kind of person. Politics is something else, and I'm not that kind of person, and it's a different kind of person. Can you talk a little bit about what your perception was before and what your understanding is now, and how those two compare or contrast of what kind of person does it take to be in politics?
Well, I'll say that we definitely need more just regular people and people who just take it upon themselves to do this. But in order to get those kinds of people, they need to be able to fundraise enough to be credible candidates. You don't need to outraise your opponent. You need to raise enough to actually get elected. So in my case, it was getting enough money to have that one commercial that to this day, 2 weeks ago, I was paying for something at a store, and the person says, "Oh wow, I thought I recognized you. I loved your commercial." Now this was 3 years ago, and I'm still getting that. So clearly, you have to use your money really smartly, but you have to have people who are willing to invest in you, and I think that's a really big lesson. But we need just regular people in these positions. We all kind of. We all get dressed, we go to work and deal with the kids, and people will ask me oh, how do you deal with the kids and everything? Well, talk to my daughters every now and then, and they will tell you that not so well. But you just do it. It's a job. It's like any other. And I think in some ways, because there's so few of us, we come with it with a commitment and a passion for not just doing the work, but also bringing others. That's really, really important to have.
I'll give you a different perspective, because I was the kid that never did run for class president, and I loved politics. I like supporting people. I have supported candidates in the past, well before I joined the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'd supported candidates. I'd done fundraising for candidates, but I never really was interested in running myself. And the position that I had as U.S. Attorney was an interesting one, because it was an appointed position by the President of the United States. So in many ways, it was a political position. But the way that I did the job, and the way all of my colleagues, there are 93 United States attorneys around the country, the goal of doing your job is that it is apolitical. You don't let politics affect your job. You make decisions, you do investigations, you prosecute cases, you reach out to all members of the community, and you don't let politics infiltrate the nature of your job. And so let me say this, because some of you out there, a big theme of today is getting folks to think about how they can be engaged. And one key way that I'm hearing throughout is, you should run, and it was amazing. I was so inspired this morning when I heard how many folks were going to be running for office who had just recently run and won. It was so inspiring. But some of you may be sitting out there thinking, I really, like me, I'm really not interested in running for politics. And I am here to say there's so many other ways that you need to think about leading, because we need Latino leaders in all industries and across the spectrum. Let me say this. First of all, if you're not interested in running for politics, you definitely can help the candidates running for
Please.
politics, whether you're raising money, knocking on doors on their behalf, holding signs and so forth. But I have to say that in the areas of education and science and medicine, and in particularly government and law enforcement, we need Latino leaders. Because in too many parts of this country and this state, the people who are there to protect us, to make important decisions for us, do not reflect those that they are there to serve. So today should be a day of thinking of, how can I be engaged? How can I make a difference in our community, regardless of the industry that you're in, so that we can advance forward in all different spectrums?
Yeah, that's so great. It's a perfect segue into the next question that I wanted to ask, which is, in both of your travels, career-wise or non-career-wise, you've had the opportunity to observe a lot of different forms of civic engagement and public service. And could you just draw out a little bit more? What are some of the different ways, right? The different pathways that you've seen, whether it's law enforcement or the judiciary, or Nellie, just in your own personal experience, you spoke to all the steps that you went through before ever putting your name on a ballot that really contributed to the system.
Yeah, I probably did all of them except the ones that you have to have a law degree, because that was my path not taken. Although I'll get asked every now and then if I'm an attorney.
Learning, yeah.
Not sure why, but.
Me too, I get that.
Because a lot of politicians are lawyers.
I know, I guess that's what it is. But anyway, so I, geez. How many of you here, for example, are either on the board of a nonprofit organization or are appointed to a governmental body? That's great. Those of you who didn't raise your hand, your homework is to get on something. So here's the thing. I moved, I grew up in Puerto Rico and went to college thinking I was, Boricua. All right. I went to college thinking I was going back home. And I ended up not doing that because I met my husband and he ended up getting a tenure track position at the University of Rhode Island. And by the time we got married, he had a job and I didn't. And so I was a following spouse. And after about 3 months of being kind of like, okay, what's gonna happen now? Because I had weekends go by and I had nowhere to go, no family dinners. Then said, okay, one day I'm reading the paper and I saw there's this governor's commission on Hispanic affairs in Rhode Island. And I said, okay, this is the early 90s. So I called the governor's office. I'm dating myself now because this is before internet. I called the governor's office. I knew it had to be, it was a public body. They have to have a public meeting. And I went to just check it out, look at it. And so after about 3 of those, checking it out and seeing who was there and what was going on, I found myself being appointed to the commission. Then I'm representing the commission on a motor voter task force. And that was my first involvement with Rhode Island government. And that experience directly relates to where I am right now. And I could have never in a million years seen it. So I was on a state board. I've been on more nonprofit boards than I can count, which again was a fantastic experience. I was on the board of the Rhode Island Latino Political Action Committee. I was also on the board of United Way. I was on the board of a mental health organization, of one of the health insurance plans. Each one of those board experiences gave me not just insights into that world that they worked in, but how do boards do the politics? How can I be an effective participant? And gave me networks to people who I normally would not have met. The United Way board introduced me to the chair of the United Way board, who happened to be the publisher of the newspaper. Then I show up at the meeting, and there's 2 bank presidents, and then there's the CEO of another company. And so suddenly you're talking to people who you would have never in a million years talked to otherwise. And so that networking that happens through your civic engagement is critically important to all of us to helping make a difference.
I couldn't agree more. It's the same thing. I mean, I remember when I was here and in school, when I first went to college, I was involved in a number of student organizations, including La Unión Latina. And when I was in law school, I was involved in a number of student organizations, including the Latino Law Student Association. And when you participate in these groups, and as an adult, when I became a lawyer, and certainly when I moved here to Massachusetts, where I didn't know very many people. I became involved at that time, the Mass Association of Hispanic Attorneys, the Women's Bar Association, and the daycare center where my children were going to be attending.
That's right.
Because I wanted to be part of that parent-run organization. And I think that, like Nellie said, it's amazing who you meet through these different organizations. And now as I look to broaden my own engagement, because as U.S. Attorney, I was very restricted. I really couldn't be on any boards or be engaged in any other kind of outside non-government activity. I look to broaden that association, because I think it's a way of, you meet other people that can be very influential for what other things you do or you choose to do in your jobs, but it's a critical way of also paving the way for others. Certainly in the law associations and like MAHA, the HMBA, the Hispanic National Bar Association, it's ways to get involved in certain committees that will pave the way for younger lawyers, which will help place, more Latino judges, professors, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and so forth, and open the ground. And I think that there were a lot of different arenas, whether it's in education with children, those kind of boards. Right now in the inner cities, kids need not just a good mechanism in the school where they're learning, but after school, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brother, Big Sister. Those are all great causes, and I think that by getting engaged, you learn more. First of all, you do well because you're doing good for others, you're giving of yourself, but I think you pave the path, and you give the contribution of a Latino. I have been in a lot of organizations where I'm the only Latina. And sometimes when I identify myself, maybe because I'm very light-skinned, since we're Carmen Ortiz, I always kept my name because I wanted to make sure people knew I was Puerto Rican, or at a minimum I was Latina. And sometimes people say, oh, you're Puerto Rican? Like, it's a surprise, because I've been in places where I am the only one, including, even at the U.S. Attorney's Office for so many years. So it's really important to be involved and be active, not only for what the riches that it can bring you, but for what the paths that you can open and the doors that you can open for others that may want to follow in your own footsteps.
Now, can you say a little bit more about the fundraising work that you did before? This is a pet peeve of mine that and it's become a pet project of mine. Honestly, I mean, I see such a dearth of fundraising talent, right, in the political ecosystem, at least in Massachusetts, and I think it's such a open pathway to power and influence for people of color, for women of color, that I would really love to see more people sort of explore that.
Absolutely, because everybody goes on the policy side or the advocacy side, which is fine. But on the finance side, right now in New England, there are candidates starved. I can tell you right now, in Rhode Island, there's still room to at least introduce one more, or if not two more, people who could make a living off of political fundraising. For sure. Where you could have a series of clients, because there's like 3 or 4 people, and that's it, and they're already tagged to others. So that's definitely the case. I mean, political fundraising is a little bit similar. I mean, it's still asking for money like you do in the nonprofit sector, but it's different at the same time. It's
faster.
It's faster. It's like every week, every day that goes by that you don't raise money, you feel it, because it's on the way to the election. It is also harder in a way because there's no tax exempt, good government, good sort of charitable kind of pitch that you for the most have that you do in the nonprofit sector. And it also tends to be transactional. I mean, let's just face it. There are certain positions for which it's really hard to raise. And then there's, governor, if you're going to be federal, that's like a whole other league. It's harder in different ways. But for a state assembly seat, for local city council, it's a lot of knocking. It's a lot of, just putting yourself out there and asking people for contributions and educating our own community about the power of investing in candidates that you believe in, and that there's something really good about that.
How did you get into that? Like, what's the first step along that path?
Well, I actually did the Emily's List. I'm an Emily's List candidate, and I actually did the Emily's List training for candidates and campaign people. So that was one thing. I also happened to be blessed with a really good friend who was my finance director, who had done fundraising for 2 members of Congress and several other very high level. So she ingrained on me kind of what the process was like for somebody going for statewide office. But there's the other thing that people don't realize is that you're judged every time those contribution reporting time periods happen. So every quarter in Rhode Island, there's an article in the paper that says the state treasurer raised this much, the secretary of state raised this much, the governor raised this much, and then jockeying and storylines start happening just based on that alone. So so-and-so didn't raise any money, oh, they're not going anywhere. Now, that may or may not be the case, but it is really important to stay ahead of it so that you're not completely discounted. Because then, for example, for somebody like me who's a statewide elected, what kind of influence I have with others within the sector is whether they see me going somewhere or not. And so that's the power that money has beyond just getting you elected. It's, do other people see you as somebody they really need to contend with or not? And I say this, I want to reemphasize, you don't need to have the most money to win. I mean, there is an entire business of fundraising that has developed in these circles and consultants and everything that will just get you on a treadmill.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be the case. And again, I'm talking more about the statewide level races, not so much city council. I mean, you have probably a different perspective.
I would 100% echo what you said, and I want to just give a shout out to my very first finance director, my very first campaign up in the top row there, Christina Acevedo. Were it not for her, I might not be here among Las Primeras. And we didn't raise the most. I didn't have to raise the most. We raised about half as much as my opponent, both my first race and then my second race. And you just need to raise enough to get your message out. I want to open up the floor to if there are questions among folks in the audience.
So I think there's a lot of room for that, and really, we have a lot to offer. I mean, I was at a meeting with a government agency that shall go nameless that was trying to do something about simplifying it for a particular type of businesses. And, here I am, this elected official that happens to be statewide. And I raised my hand and I said, that's all really great, the work you're doing so far. But once you simplify it to the point where you think it's so easy for everybody, I want you to do something for me. I want you to do a focus group of actual community people and put them in front of the process. Because you will hear concerns that you haven't even thought of, because those people are not in the room. And there's a reason why they're not participating in government programs, because you can't see it. It's not that there's an intent to exclude, it's that there isn't even a recognition of what are the challenges that people in the neighborhood are facing. So there's a ton of room. And I was the only Latina in the room in that particular meeting that had some 25 government people. So there's a ton of room, not just in elected, but appointed in government positions.
I think there's a ton of opportunities, especially as our community continues to increase in numbers. The more that our population increases, the more that you have, going to school, graduating from school. You see it now. I see it in the numbers of certain associations where 20 years ago, a meeting, you'd have 10 people, 15 people attending a meeting, and now you have 50 or 100 at a meeting. You have I'll give you a perfect, this is today. Today is a perfect example of that. And you can sit there and wait for these opportunities, but you got to make opportunities happen. And I have to say that, and I know they've gotten a lot of applause, and they're going to be getting applauses after today is over, but Betty and Anita have done an amazing thing today by providing this opportunity where they're asking you to do, I think people can do 3 to 4 things on this chart. And by being engaged by taking on responsibility, you create those opportunities. Because when you join boards or you're on commissions, when you represent, when you help another one, if you don't want to run for politics, if you help another politician or someone else run for politics and you get involved that way, you meet other folks that can provide you with opportunities. So you generate opportunities. And I think the fact that so many people were here today, I'm telling you, I was so inspired because I see the growth in our community. And it's not just having babies, we're more educated, we're more sophisticated, we're more together and ready and willing to really move forward in action. And so I think that it's gonna be better and greater, but you know, you can't just be inspired today and walk out the door and say, oh, that was good. I'll wait for the next email in another 2 years, right? We've got to go out there and be part of that change. We are the engines of that change and opportunity.
I see another hand here. I just want to tack on really quickly because, Julie, I know a little bit of your story, and I think it's relevant to people. To your point about the imposter syndrome, the lived experience that you have, right, is so like you're so ready. And I know that's true for so many people in this room. As a parent organizer, you've done that work of uniting people across, Black, white, Latino, Cape Verdean. You've done field work. You could be the next awesome campaign fundraiser. And I always tell people, and this is really true, one of the two best, components of training that I ever had for running for office was waiting tables. Right, and so it doesn't have to be in the traditional sense that, that we come with assets. We know how to do this already, and we just need to take what we've got and apply it to a new situation.
Absolutely. In my case, I'm a statewide official, so I represent an entire state. My district is not majority Latino. There's about 14% of our population in Rhode Island is Latino. I have, in this position and in every other position in my life, advocated for things that I feel, that I see that others don't, from the point of view that I am a Latina. So that's how I've carried it in my work. It might be that, I took advantage of the fact that I could convene the new Secretary of Commerce with Latino business owners at the very beginning of his tenure, so that I could hopefully, have a conversation where he saw us as assets and business people, not just, sort of needing programs or services. I did some stuff like that, but a lot of my work is broader, and it has to do with civic engagement. So, for example, we got new voting machines for the entire state. I made sure that those machines, were in Spanish and English, because Spanish is a Voting Rights Act language. I made sure that all of our English and Spanish language elections material are in a language format that people can understand. It does us no good to distribute millions of, hundreds of thousands of copies of a voter handbook that talks down to people, that is in legalese, and that I, with a master's in public administration, don't understand what it means to approve or reject a particular question. I think that's disenfranchising people. And so I said, no, we're gonna do this in plain English or plain Spanish. And, so we did that. We did online voter registration. Many of the people in our community are on our phones. We're not on, to download a PDF are millennials, many of whom are, Latinos and people of color. They operate in an online world. We had a paper registration system. So doing online, getting the legislature to approve online voter registration. So it's there in my being, but there are fewer opportunities given when you're in a statewide position to solely laser in on those particular opportunities. A lot of what I can do, though, is to open the door for others who have a more targeted focus group to be able to access those resources.
I think for me, and the same thing, U.S. Attorney, you're statewide, and you're really the chief federal law enforcement officer. So you're investigating, prosecuting, but in that, you're also doing a lot of prevention work. One key area was, let's just start with enhancing the diversity within our own office. And that I was very active. I didn't just target the Latino community, I targeted, all groups of color and other differences, as well as gender and so forth. So I did a lot of outreach with the affinity bars and different types of organizations and recruitment. I established a hiring committee so that the hiring would be fair and objective and transparent within our office. I set up a diversity committee within our office to tend those issues. In terms of the law enforcement piece, I think as the senator mentioned earlier, I had established the civil rights unit, and in that we did a tremendous amount of outreach in the civil rights arena about knowing your rights and being able to feel comfortable turning to us if you felt your rights were being violated or you felt harassed or intimidated. So that was important. And on our violent crime strategy, especially in dealing with a lot of inner city communities, we went out there to many schools, many who were minority Latino, others were more majority African American, but Latinos in many different arenas. And we would talk about your future, your decision. And I think they could identify with me because of who I was. And I would talk about making the right choices, putting in a support mechanism, who to reach out to when you needed help. And we would combine that with someone who had not made right choices, who had been a gang member, had gone to jail, and how they've turned their life around, and then connected it with a resource fair so that the kids in that community knew what resources were there for them outside of school and within school. And so in that arena, I just went out through all the community members.
Thank you, guys. I think we're going to wrap it up, but I'll just close by saying this panel was titled Las Primeras, and we hope that at the next time there'll be one Las Segundas, because we're not trying to be the only ones. I've been here,
I know. Just to add to you, I always say I'm the first woman and first Latina U.S. attorney, but hopefully not the last.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Let's give them a round of applause.